Are you searching for a method to level up? Your English, have you attempted reading, but you always get bored or find it too hard? Then you should attempt to listen to this story chapter. 1. My name is David, and my story begins one morning in June 1751. This was the day I left my father's house in Endine for the last time. My friend Mr. Campbell was waiting for me. "I'll go with you to the river," said Mr. Campbell. We strolled together along the road without speaking. After some time, Mr. Campbell asked, "Are you regretful to leave Dan?" "I don't know, sir," I answered, "because I don't know where I'm going, or what will become of me. I've been very happy in Endine, but I've never been anywhere else. My mother and father are dead now, and I'm going to make my future." Mr. Campbell informed me that my father had left him a letter before he died. He told me it was my inheritance. Here's the letter," told Mr. Campbell, handing it to me. "Your father instructed me to deliver to you the letter and take you to the residence of Shaws, near Edinburgh. It is where your father originated from, and he instructs you to go back there." The letter was for Mr. Ebenezer Baylor, House of Shaws. Underneath the address was inscribed, "This letter shall be delivered by my son, David Balfour." I was shocked, because I knew nothing of the House of Shays. I was just 17 years old, and I felt afraid of the new stage of my life that was going to start. Mr. Campbell bid farewell. I glanced at Endon for the last time. Then I turned and walked towards Edinburgh and my future. On the morning of the second day, reached the top of a hill. Below me I saw the city of Edinburgh and the sea. There were ships on the sea. I saw a group of English soldiers, the red coats, marching along the road. When I was closer to Edinburgh, he asked people for directions to the House of Shaws. Everyone seemed surprised when he asked about this house. At first I thought it was because I looked very poor, but after a while I thought that there was something strange about the House of Shaws. I started to worry. Before, I pictured a large house with rich relatives. Now it appeared that this was not true. What awaits me at the House of Shaws, I believed there was only one way to know. I walked and soon I saw a large house standing alone in the bottom of the next valley. It was the House of Shaws. It was not how I imagined. The house was very old and in bad shape. There was no gate at the entrance, no path to the front door, and no smoke issued from the chimneys. It seemed empty. It was dark when I reached the house, and there were no lights, and I knocked once on the large wooden door. I waited, but nothing happened. I knocked again. Nothing happened. But I heard someone inside. So I became angry. I began kicking the door and shouting for Mr. David. I heard a sound above me. I glanced upwards, and there was a man with a large gun peering out of the upper window. "It's loaded," he told me. "I have a letter," I said to Mr. Ebenezer Baylor. "Who are you?" the man inquired, still clutching the gun. "I'm David Baylor," I answered. After a pause, the man spoke again, but more quietly. "Is your father dead?" he asked. "He must be dead. That's why you're here." "I'll let you in." The door opened and I entered into the house. "Let me see the letter," the man said. I informed him. The letter was to Mr. David, not him. I am Mr. David, he said. I'm your father's brother, your uncle. I stared at him in astonishment. I didn't know my father had a brother. He led me to a room to rest in. Then he pushed me in and locked the door at my back. I wanted to weep. I was exhausted from my long walk. I lay down and soon fell asleep. Chapter 2. Uncle Ebenezer. The following morning, I knocked on the door and hollered until my uncle released me out. We sat at the table and my uncle provided me with some breakfast. He did not speak much or even look me in the eye. And then he asked me a question. Where's your mother? He said. I informed him that she was also dead. She was a lovely girl. He said, the day proceeded in this manner. He asked me a question from time to time after prolonged silences. But when I attempted to question him about the letter and my inheritance, he said nothing. I wished to inquire about my uncle concerning my father, who was the eldest brother. I asked. He sprang up. Why do you ask that? He said suddenly, grasping my jacket. What do you mean? I asked him calmly. Release my jacket. I said he released me. Don't ask me about your father. He said that's why I got angry. I started thinking my uncle was mad and possibly harmful. Later in the night, my uncle gave me some money. 37 gold coins. This was a lot of money. Why are you giving me this money? I asked, what do you want? In return, nothing much. He said, but I'm getting old and I need someone to help me around the house. Then he handed me a key. He said, it was for a tower at the other end of the house. Go up the stairs in the tower, find some papers and bring them to me. He said. I unlocked the door to the tower. There was no light inside and it was dark. Very slowly, I climbed the stairs in the darkness. As I climbed higher and higher, I started to feel the wind on my legs. The stairs appeared to shift under my feet. Suddenly, there was a flash of lightning. The sudden light saved my life. I saw in the flash of light that the stairs were old and crumbling. I was going to fall. Why did my uncle send me here? Wash trying to kill me. I was frightened, but also extremely angry. I slowly descended down the stairs, using flashes of lightning as a guide to find my way. Then I returned inside the kitchen. My uncle was seated with his back to me and did not notice me. Enter. I placed my hands down firmly on his shoulders. This startled my uncle. He was an old man and he collapsed onto the floor. I left him there and searched for a weapon. My uncle was dangerous to me, and I wanted to be told why. I discovered an old dagger. I sat beside him and waited when he opened his eyes. I started to fire questions. Why don't you want to explain about my father? Why did you offer me the money? And above all, why did you attempt to kill me? The old man seemed so frail and tired. I'll respond to your questions tomorrow morning, he said. I locked him in a room and waited for morning. The next morning we had breakfast. While we were eating, I watched my uncle cautiously. I was waiting for him to respond to my questions, but he said Nothing suddenly. There was a knock at the doors. I opened it and saw a young boy in sailor's uniform. I have a letter from Mr. David, from Captain Hosen. The boy said he showed me the letter. I'm very hungry. He added helpy. I opened the door for him and he completed my breakfast. My uncle read the letter, then handed it to me. Here is what it said. My uncle informed me that he was doing some business with Hosen, the captain of a ship called the Covenant. Let us go and see him, he said, and then later we could go and see Meranker, the lawyer. He knew your father. I considered this and decided to go. I wanted to see this lawyer, perhaps. He might answer my questions, and with so many people around, my uncle cannot try to kill me again. Thought I also wanted to look at the sea. Let's go. Isaiah, on the way there, I spoke to the young sailor. His name was Ransom. My uncle did not say a word. Ransom explained the ship, the captain, and the rest of the sailors. He explained that Captain Hosen was aggressive and was not an excellent sailor. Ransom explained that a man by the name of Mr. Schwann actually knew how to handle the ship we reached the top of a hill from. There Ransom took me to the Covenant, out at sea. There was also a little boat that took individuals out to the ship. We walked down the hill and entered the Sin. It was extremely hot inside. After some time, I thought of going outside to have a breath of fresh air. When I went out, my uncle was in a conversation with Captain Hosen outside. I spoke to the owner of the HS, and he narrated me a very interesting tale. The tale was that Ebenezer murdered my father Alexander because he yearned for the house of Shaws. So Alexander was the first son, Icarid. Of course he was told the owner because of that Ebenezer murdered him. So my dad was the first son. One, he could not believe my luck 2 days. Back, I was a poor boy with nothing, and now I had a house in some land. I was lost in these thoughts. When Captain Hosen came, "Do you want to see the interior of my ship?" he asked. I was extremely curious to see inside the Covenant, and I accompanied Captain Hosen. "So, David, what can I bring back, for you mentioned Captain Hosen? A friend of Mr. David's is my friend as well. He, my uncle, and I got into the small boat and crossed the water towards the Covenant. By the time we reached the ship, one thought that Captain Hosen was a good friend when we were alongside it. I was amazed at how large it was. I was not actually paying attention to what the captain was saying. Hosen said that I have to go on to his ship first. A rope was lowered down for me. I was lifted into the air and set down on the deck of the big ship. Then the captain appeared. But where is my uncle?" one asked. Suddenly I sprinted to the side of the ship. There was the little boat with my uncle still aboard. He was heading back to the land. "Help return," I yelled. My uncle turned to face me. His hard face was the last thing I saw. Someone's firm hands held me from behind, and I was struck on the head by something hard. Then everything went black. Chapter 3. Kidnapped. When I awoke, it was dark. My hands and feet were bound together with rope, and I was in terrible pain. I was very confused. I knew that I was somewhere within the ship. It was going up and down with the motion of the waves. I felt seasick. I dozed off again, but not for long afterwards. A little. Man woke me and shone a light in my face. I was extremely ill. My head ached, I did not feel like eating, and I had a fever. The little man returned with the captain. "You have to do something I overheard." The man say, "He'll die if you leave him in here." Then the man, Mr. Rash, cut the ropes and took me upstairs. He placed me at the front of the ship with the rest of the crew. Then everything went black. Again, I remained here for many days and gradually improved. Ransom informed me that the ship was going to America. At this point, white men were still being sold as slaves in America. I was sure that this was my uncle's intention for me. He paid Captain Hosen to sell me as a slave in America. Ransom then informed me of the other men. Mr. Riot was a good man, except when he was sober. Mr. Schwann, the man that actually knew how to sail the ship, was only dangerous when he was drunk. He frequently hit Ransom when he was drunk. One evening, when Mr. Schwann was drunk, he killed Ransom. Captain Hosan informed me I had to do Ransom's work. I now had to remain in another area of the ship with Mr. Schwann. In this section of the ship, they had all the provisions, liquor, and arms. Afterwards, we sat at a table. There was a bottle of brandy before Mr. Schwann. He held out his hand to take the bottle, but Mr. R.I. halted him. "You've already murdered a boy because you were intoxicated," he sobbed. "Now stop," and he hurled the bottle of brandy into the ocean. Mr. Schwann sprang up. He seemed to be going to kill for the second time that evening, but Captain Hosand restrained him enough. He told him, "Do you know what you've done?" Had demanded Schwann. "You've killed Ransom." Mr. Shaw appeared to grasp. He sat down, hiding his face in his hands. "Well, he fed me on a filthy plate," he said quietly. The captain led Schwann to his bed. "Go to sleep," he said. Mr. Schwann lay down on the bed and began to cry. Now I was Mr. Schwann's servant, but was content to serve because it kept me from thinking too much about my situation. A week passed. The weather was not favorable for sailing, and we were not progressing very far. I believed we were halfway across the Atlantic, but this was not. So we were still sailing south around the west coast of Scotland one evening. It was extremely foggy around 10 now. I was waiting on dinner for Mr. Rash and the captain. We heard a banging noise as the ship crashed into something. The two men stood up and went to see. "We've run into a boat in the fog," someone said. The other boat sank to the bottom of the sea with all of the crew bar this man was brought aboard to Covenant. He was a wee man. He dressed in fine quality attire, and he had 2 guns and a sword. He and the captain stared at each other. The man informed us that his name was Alan Breck Stewart. He was from Scotland, a Jacobee. He was fighting the English a few years prior. The English had won, but their soldiers, the redcoats, were still searching for Jacobee fighters. Alan Breck was attempting to reach France and escape them. He requested Captain H. Season to go with him there. France replied, the captain, "No, I can't, but I can bring you back to Scotland for money." Of course, the captain dismissed me to fetch some food for Allenbury. When I returned, he was counting some money on the table. The captain appeared excited. "Give me half of those coins, and I'll bring you to Scotland." He said Alan Breck invested his money a way I can't. He explained the money is not mine. It's for my chief. I can't give much of it away. But I'll give you 60 coins if you bring me back to Scotland. Take it or leave it. Or I could hand you over to the redcoats, said the captain. That's not a good idea. Those soldiers want this money. Too, they have to hand it over to King George if you give me to the redcoats. They won't let you keep any of this money. Well, 60 coins it is. Let's shake hands. The captain left. I cut some meat for Alan Breck and put it in front of him. So you're a Jacobi? I asked. Yes, he said. And you, I imagine you support King George, not one or the other, I said, because I did not want to make him angry. There's no brandy anymore. He said, I want a drink for my 60 coins. I went to fetch the key to the brandy cupboard. From the captain, it was still misty outside. I saw the captain speaking to Miriac, and I overheard what they were saying. They were going to kill Alan Breck so that they could get the rest off his money. When I heard this, I was frightened and angry. I did not want to be on a ship with such dishonest, violent men. My first thought was to run away, but I decided not till I stepped forward. Captain, I said, the man wants some brandy and the bottle is empty. Can I have the key to get some more? The men were surprised to hear my voice and turned around. Quickly, that's the answer, said Hosen to Marash. David can get the guns he knows. Or then he spoke to me and said, listen, David, that man is a threat to the ship, and we need to do something about it. The issue is this, David. All of our guns are in the room. He is, and now if I go in and grab the guns, he'll know something is amiss. But if you go in and grab a gun or two, he won't notice. If you do this, you can have some of the money too. I'll remember this when we get to America. I said that I would assist them, but truly I did not know what to do. They were thieves and murderers, and I did not trust them. But then what chance did one man, Alan Breck, and one boy, me, have against a whole crew? Chapter 4, The Fight. I went back into the room where Alan was having his meal, and I made a decision. Do you want to be murdered? I asked him. He jumped up hastily. They've already killed a boy, and now they're going to kill you. I said, will you assist me? He asked. I will. I said. Now we looked about to find how to defend ourselves. There were 2 doors into the room and 1 little window. We shut one of the doors and left the other one open. He drew his sword and handed me all the guns. Now listen to me, he said. How many men are there? 15, I said. Well, there's nothing we can do about that. I'll watch this door where the main fight will be. You must use the guns and watch the other door. I told him I was not a very good shot. If they try to open the door, you must shoot. He said, now what else do you have to watch the window? Sir, I said. But how am I supposed to view both at the same time when I'm staring at one of them? My back is facing the other. That's true, said Alan. But don't you have any ears? Of course, I said. You need to listen for the breaking of glass. Exactly, said Alan. In the meantime, the captain was still waiting for me to get back with them gins. At last he arrived at the door. Alan blocked him with his word. What's this? Said. Hoses, I save your life, and you display assword. "Oh, I see what you're thinking," said Alan now. "Send your men and let's get down to business. I want to begin this battle as soon as possible." The captain gave me a look. "I'll never forget this. David," he said. We waited and listened. We heard voices and the sound of metal swords, then silence. I wished the battle to start. The waiting was getting on my nerves. Then suddenly it broke out. There was the noise of feet and individuals yelling. I heard Alan yell and someone scream because he was injured. I glanced over and saw Alan slaying Mr. Schwann with his word. "Watch your window," hailed. I looked and saw 5 men approaching the other door. They were attempting to break it. Down I fired at them with my gun and struck one of them. The others appeared, perplexed. I fired at them again over their heads, and then a third time the men ran away. Somebody pulled Mr. Schwann's body out of the room. Then Alan and I were left alone. "It's not over yet," he said. "They'll be back." I reloaded my 3 guns. Then we listened and waited again. We heard a sound and a group of men ran at the door at the same time. The glass of the window broke and a man came through it. I shoved the gun into his back, but I was too afraid to shoot. He turned around and grabbed his hands around my neck. My courage returned. I shot him. A second man was entering. Through the window, I shot him in the leg and he collapsed on top of the other man. I stood staring at them. But then I heard Alan call out for help. I turned and saw him struggling with a man. Many more men were entering through the door with swords. In the air we're dead, I thought. But Alan charged at them all with his sword with each step. A man fell suddenly. They were all gone, and Alan was chasing after them. He returned, but the men kept running away in the room. There were 3 dead men on the floor and another man lay dying close to the door. Alan and I stood side by side. "We've succeeded," he said tranquilly. I sat down. It was difficult to breathe. I remembered the 2 men I killed. Abruptly, I began to cry like a child. "You're exhausted, David. I'll keep an eye, and you can sleep," he said. "You've done greatly." I slept for 3 hours. Then Alan's turn came to sleep. I knew that there was no one steering the ship. It was gliding smoothly with wind. I could hear the birds making a noise. I realized we were getting close to land. I peeked out the window and could see the hills of the Isle of Skye on the right, and behind us the Isle of Room Chapter 5 ship goes down. Alan and I had breakfast around squaw in the morning. I was not too hungry. The floor was still littered with broken glass and a lot blood. But otherwise our position was good. Everything to eat and drink was in our room. Mr. Ryat and the captain were in the other room. Further down the ship, Alan cut one of the silver buttons off his coat and gave it to me as a gift. My father gave them to me. He said, "Take one to remind you of last night, wherever you go, and produce that button. My friends will assist you not long afterwards." Mr. Rash and the captain visited us and they looked very tired. "You've sunk my ship," remarked the captain. "There are no men to man it. We'll have to return to Glasgow. But this coast is full of dangers for ships. You've killed the the only person who knew how to navigate it. I've sailed up and down this coast many times," said Alan. "I'll give you 60 coins if you bring me to Loch Liner." The captain agreed to this. They also agreed to trade some brandy for 2 buckets of water. The captain and Mr. R.I. were pleased, and we tidied up our room when we struck Alan's boat. We're passing through the Little Minch at dawn after the battle. We were close to the Isle of Cana. The shortest route to Loch El was via the Sound of Mull. But the captain did not have a map of this portion of the sea, and he feared Tautamage, his ship within this little channel of water, so we agreed to sail along the west coast of Mull around the south and up into Theloch. This was a most delightful time on the Covenant. The sun was out, the wind was good, and the mountains on the islands were exceedingly beautiful. Alan and I shared each other's tales throughout time, but when I mentioned my friend Mr. Campbell, Alan said that he hated all people with the name of Campbell, but he is a good man. I said, "Why do you hate all Campbell?" I asked him. Alan explained to me that the Campbell had killed members of his family. Afterwards, they then stole their land from them too. Alan then had to enlist in the English army to earn some money. I was shocked at this because Alan's Scottish ancestry was so crucial to him. But then I abandoned him. He exclaimed, "And now if the redcoats discover me, they'll kill me. So you're a Jacob and an English deserter. Why are you here in Scotland? Surely it's too risky." I inquired. "I have friends and family here," he said, "but I also steal money from the people in Scotland to their chief Ari, now resides in France. But he desires to go back to Scotland. He wishes to regain his land in behalf of his followers. Ariel's half-brother, James, collects the money from the people, and I deliver it to Ariel in France. So the Highlanders pay twice to utilize their land. I once asked King George of England and dance to Ari." "That's correct," said Alan. "When the Highlanders lost the English at Cullen, Earshield had to flee, and Hyde the English stole all his authority, and Highland they also stole the weapons. From the Highlanders, a Campbell named the Red Fox works for King George. He pays the king the rent from Earshield's land, but the people still love their chief and still give him money. The English can't prevent that. But when the Red Fox heard about the money they were paying to Archield Higatangri, and then what did he do?" I asked. "Well, David, he said the Red Fox wants Arkell to die, so he arranged all the stewards to leave their homes. Now I'll go and look for the Red Fox and kill him." Alan was seriously angry now, so I thought that talked of something else. "How did you manage to escape the red coats? They are everywhere. Scotland, it's simpler than you imagine." He said, "If you know the countryside yourself, down here like I do, you can escape the soldiers. And there are always friends to assist you." It was late in the evening, but since it was summer, it was still relatively light. The captain entered with a very worried face. He wanted Alan to take the ship sailing. We went out and looked at the Zia on the one side of the ship. We saw something resembling a fountain. "What's that?" the captain asked Alan. He explained it to him that It was the sea splashing against some rocks. Then we saw other fountains. There were rocks. Under the water, everywhere it was extremely risky to navigate. The ship without a chart to indicate to us where the rocks were. Alan believed that there were less rocks nearer the land. For some time, we navigated near the Isle of Mull and we were safe. But as we rounded the coast of Mull, the wind died down and the waves propelled the ship towards the Music Coast. The following minute, the ship collided with Therox with a great crunch. We all tumbled onto the deck. The waves increased in size and the ship was thrust onto the rocks time and again. Some of the men were attempting to launch. As Mal bowed into the sea, it was extremely difficult because the sea was sound-pleasant waves kept breaking over us, and the ship was sinking out of nowhere. One of the men yelled out, an enormous wave struck the Covenant and we were all flung into sea. My head went under the water and I began to sink. I came up, but at once I was pulled down. Again, I don't know how many times. I sank and came up the waves and the wind were very strong, and it was hard to breathe. After a while, I found a piece of wood. I clung to it until I was in calm water. I looked around me and saw some land not very far away. By now, I was extremely cold. I knew I had to swim to the land or die. It was extremely difficult, but after an hour one was finally on land. I reclined on the beach. In the moonlight, I was exhausted, but alive. Chapter 6. The murder of the Red Fox. There was nothing on the land. No houses, no lights, just land. I was exhausted, but glad to be alive. I did not know whether any of the others had lived when morning arrived. I walked up to the top of a hill and scanned out at the sea. There was nothing on the sea. No ship, not even the smaller boat. I glanced around me and I saw that I was standing on a tiny island. Nobody lived there. It was cut off from the mainland by the sea and there was no means of reaching there. All by myself. Two thought I had nothing but a bit of money and Alan's silver button. I didn't know very much about the sea and how to survive, but I was hungry, cold, thirsty, and weary. I needed to eat something. I ate shellfish off the rocks. It sometimes made me sick, but it was food. I was getting desperate when one day I spotted a tiny boat with two fishermen. I yelled and waved at them, but they continued on muttering something in heavenly and laughing. I rested on the ground and wept. I'm going to die on this island, I thought. But the following day the sun was shining. The shellfish did not make me sick, and I started to hope. Again I sat on a rock and peered out to see there was the same little boat. Coming towards the island, I hurried down to the beach. Please help stop, I shouted as the boat drew nearer. I noticed that it was the same two fishermen as before, but with someone else. The boat halted and the man began shouting at me and gesturing. One only understood one or two words I made out the word tide at once. I caught on. Do you mean that when the tide I slow? I hadn't completed my sentence. Yes, yes, shouted the man. Tide. I went back and ran across to the other side of the island. I could hear them laughing behind me. I realized when the tide was low, the island joined up to the mainland. It was an island. When the tide rose high, I've spent all this time here when I'm able to walk onto the mainland twice. A day when I reached the mainland, one approached an old man to gather details of Alan and the other men. "You will have to be the boy with the silver button." He said, "Yes, I am." I said, surprised. "Well then," he said, "you will have to go to Totoros and catch the boat there to see your friend Inapen." So again, I was journeying in a strange country. This was the highlands, Alan's country. There were high mountains, one other side of me, and black clouds in the sky above. The people seemed very poor, but they assisted me on my journey after a few days traveling. I arrived in Appin to Meetlin. I noticed the red coats of the English soldiers moving along the North Music coast. I was anxious because I knew they were dangerous for Alan. I also knew Alan was somewhere on that coast waiting for me. I began to have doubts. Was I doing the right thing? Why was I searching for Alan? He was a dangerous man to be with. Perhaps I should go back to the south and depart alone. As I was sitting, I overheard the voice of men and horses making their way through the wood shortly. 4 men with their horses. Arrived, the leading man had a red head and seemed serious. I knew right away that he was the Red Fox by their attire. The others appeared to be a lawyer, an army officer, and a servant. When I met these men, I made my decision. I must locate Alan, I thought, when the Red Fox came near. I questioned him the way to Okar, a nearby village. "Who are you?" he answered. "And why are you so far from your home country?" He knew from my voice that I was not from this part of Scotland. "I'm an honest supporter of King George of England." I informed him, "TM not dangerous." The Red Fox did not trust me. "We'll wait for the soldiers," he said. He turned to face the lawyer. As he spun around was the sound of a gunshot from further up the hill. At the very same moment, the Red Fox fell to the ground. "I've been shot!" he cried. "I'm dying." The lawyer cradled the dying man in his arms. The Red Fox gazed from the lawyer to his servant. There was a look of fear in his eyes. "Look after yourselves," he said to them. He breathed a heavy sigh. Then his head fell forward. He was dead. The attorney laid him down on the road. This broke me out of my shock. "The killer! The killer!" I screamed, and started to go up the hill. After a short few minutes, I saw the killer walking off, not so far ahead of me. He was a big man with black coat and a big weapon. "I can see him!" it cried. The killer started to run. I glanced. Down the hill, the soldiers were present now, and the lawyer and the officer were instructing me to return. "No," I yelled. "Come up here. I'll pay you 10 if you catch that boy," yelled the lawyer. "He's helping with the killer." He halted us and began talking while the killer killed Third Fox. Chapter 7. The Long Trip Home. I was bewildered. Things were changing so fast I did not know what to believe. The soldiers started climbing the hill. "Then the rest of them come in here behind these trees," said the voice behind me. I did what I was told to do and heard shots coming through the air beyond the trees. Just within the trees was Alan Bray. He was quiet except for run. He took off across the mountain and followed me. After some time we stopped running. "This is getting serious," Alan warned. Do as I do for your life at the same pace. We ran back over the mountain, but a bit higher. At last we stopped behind some trees. We were panting. Alan moved first. He went to the edge of the wood and looked around carefully. Then he came back. Are you all right, David? Hesked. I said nothing and did not even look at him. A man was killed in front of me. The man that Alan hated, and here was Alan hiding in the trees, running from the soldiers. Was Alan the killer? Or did he get someone else to kill the red fox? My sole friend in this foreign land was responsible for the death of another man. I did not wish to see him. I wanted to be alone, not hiding here with a killer. Are you still fatigued? Asked Alan. No. I replied, but you and I have to go our separate ways. Alan, I liked you very much, but Ito not like the things that you do. They are not my ways, and they are not God's ways. I must leave you. Alan considered for a while. Do you think that I killed the red fox? David hesked me. Well, I know how much you hated him. If I want to kill a man, I will not do it in my own country, said Alan. We don't have a lot of time. We have to escape from here if we get caught. I'll be in trouble since I'm a deserter, and you'll be in trouble because you participated in the murder of the red fox, he said. But I'm innocent. I said, I'm not afraid of the law in my own country. This is not your country, said Alan. Listen, David, the dead man, Isaac Campbell, if they catch you, the Campbell will want someone to die for this murder and that. So someone could be you. This is the Campbell law. Here, this frightened me. You people of the lowlands don't. No. We're in the highlands, David. When I tell you run, believe me. And run. It's hard to run and hide here, but it's harder to be in a redcoat prison. I'll take my chances with you, Alan. I told you. It'll be tough, cautioned Alan, but your only other option is death. We clasped hands. Now let's go see where the redcoats are. Now, he said. We began. Walking. Night came. It was a cloudy night, so it was very dark. Sometimes we walked, sometimes we ran. We journeyed on and on until I was weary and weak. At daybreak, we stopped. Alan came across a good spot. High up between two rocks, I slept. I was wakened by Alan's hand across my mouth. Esh, Hasked, you were making too much noise in your sleep. Well, what's the matter? I asked. He crossed over to the edge of the rock and called me. Overlook, he said. Quietly, it was now midday and extremely hot from the rock. We looked down into a valley. A river ran through it. About half a mile up the river were a group of redcoats. I looked around. There were more redcoats. Everywhere I looked, I was fearful of this, David said. Alan, they started to arrive around 2 hours ago, but you were sleeping. If they remain down in the valley, we'll be fine. But if they ascend up here, they'll spot us. We'll remain here until it is dark, and then we'll attempt to pass them. All that day we rested in the scorching sun, but we didn't have no water. So at last, Alan concluded we had to move. We leaped down from the rock and waited in the shade. The sun also made the soldiers exhausted. Many were sleeping. We began to depart the rocks. We went slowly, but by the night we were quite far from the redcoats. Afterwards, we discovered some fresh water and bathed and drank from it. We felt secure and made up our minds to stop in that. And so we journeyed thus for several days, always keeping an eye out for redcoats, always on the move south. I wanted to reach Edinburgh, and Alan had to get to France. We became every tired and hungry. We did not say much because we were so tired. I was becoming sick, but I knew we had to continue going. But then I felt really sick and I could not go on. I had to beg Alan to assist. My leg just could not go on any further. I had a fever and my stomach ached. Alan said he would get me a house to re-stressed. Fortunately, the family at the initial house we encountered knew Alan well. By name, they recognized that I was unwell and called a doctor. I was young and robust and slowly began to recover. I lay in bed for only a week while doing this. Alan never left me. It was highly risky for Alan to remain there. The redcoats could detect him, but Hestel came to visit me each evening and concealed in the woods during the day. After a month, we were ready to keep going south towards Edinburgh. Chapter 8. The Return to Edinburgh. I was now stronger and was looking forward to my return to Edinburgh. The only thing was that we'd very little money. We had to move fast. We arrived at the river Forth, we then had to plan how to cross it to Edinburgh. There were still a lot of soldiers there to get past. Fortunately, Alan managed to find a boat to take us over the water to Queensfa near Edinburgh. Morning had arrived, and now I had to locate Mr. Ranker, the lawyer. I had to talk to him about my father and my inheritance. I also needed to inform him about my uncle Ebenezer's plot to kidnap me on the Covenant and send me to America. Alan was going to wait until sunset before meeting me again. If all goes well with Marronner, I can lend you the money to assist you in getting to France, I explained. Alan, soon I was in Queen's Ferry searching for Mr. Rankeeler's home. Only now is started to have doubts. Will I find the house? Will Mar Rayner believe me? Maybe he won't want to assist me. What will I do? Then I walked up and down and at last ended up in front of a very pretty house. The door was opened, and a man walked out. Can you point me out which house belongs to Miss Ranker Ekerid? Well, said the man, it's the house I have just exited from. I am Miss Ranker. Well, sir, I replied, can I talk to you? But I do not know your name nor your face, said Mr. Ranker. Who are you? My name is David Balfour, sir, I replied. David Balfour, he said, sounding